Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future of Museum Professionals in the Digital Era online conference. We're happy to see so many of you joining. My name is Natalie Giorgadze, and I'm Community and Communications Director at Culture Action Europe. I will be facilitating today's event. Because of the new realities that we are all living in, this conference has been moved online, and we have adjusted the program to make sure it fits best to the format. We do look forward for interesting contributions and engaging conversations this morning. Now, without further delay, let me introduce our two speakers, our co-hosts today, Dr. Achilles Kameas, Professor of Pervasive Systems with Hellenic Open University and Head of DAISSy Research Group, and Tere Badia, Secretary General of Culture Action Europe, the major European network of cultural organizations, artists, activists, and policymakers. Hellenic Open University is the main lead behind the Mu.SA project, and I'm happy to give the floor to Achilles now for his welcome words. Achilles?
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Mu.SA final conference, the final conference of this very, very nice and exciting project that with all our colleagues that you see here online, we went through this past 3.5 years. We have prepared an interesting program for you, and we hope that you will stay with us until the end. But anyway, I'd like to thank you right from the beginning for joining us. Mu.SA project was about the impact of digital technologies on the museum sector. Digital technologies are becoming more and more widespread and are affecting the professional sectors of many professional sectors, almost every profession. They are as we say, they are leading to the digital transformation of our society. More and more services are becoming available online. More and more capabilities are provided to professionals and to citizens to to implement, to do online. And the society is becoming, we hope, more and more efficient as it becomes more and more digital. But you have probably discovered that yourselves in order to benefit from the digital transformation, in order to be included in this digital society, in order to live a happy life with people around you, one must possess digital competencies, increasingly possess digital competencies. From our research in this project and from our experience, we understood that there are two levels of digital competencies. One needs the digital competencies that are addressed to professionals, the IT competencies as we can call them, but also the digital competencies addressed to the everyday person. And we managed in this project to combine both of them. But this is the situation now, the current situation. But technology evolution, technology progress doesn't stop. Technological progress doesn't stop. We expect things to become increasingly technology dependent in the future, and I'm talking about digital technology. So digital competencies are going to be changing. The necessary digital competencies are going to be evolving. Already the key enabling technologies are entering our lives. First among them, artificial intelligence. We've all heard about the new AI wave and the revolution it's going to bring, and we have to prepare for that. Well, it seems that these technologies affect about 80% of the occupations currently, and this number is expected to increase, which means that there is going to be new descriptions for occupational profiles that will include digital competencies as their integral part, and this will be made visible in the next version of ESCO, the European database of occupational profiles. And this leads to the need for the average citizens, but also for the professionals to improve their competencies, to improve their ability to function in the digitally transformed sector and society in general. In a recent event that I participated, Commissioner Smith talked about a revolution regarding skills upgrade because of the introduction of information technology in the sectors. And one instrument they have previewed, the individual learning accounts, will be focused directed on that. This means that a lot of training is going to be needed, a lot of lifelong learning, continuous lifelong learning, I would say, in order for people to be able to participate in a digitally transformed society. But training is not enough. Training should lead to accreditation, should lead to recognition of skills, should lead to certification, and in the end, enable mobility among sectors and among countries. And at the same time, training should lead to a higher quality of work. In this development of the audience. In this way, I think we can achieve the happiness we're pursuing from both sides, both for the professionals and the society that is receiving their services. This was the concept behind the Mu.SA project, and we worked hard for 3.5 years towards this. And today we will present to you what we achieved, and we hope you will be as happy and proud as we are about it. That was my introduction. Thank you very much again for being here, and looking forward to hearing your questions and answers in the session. Back to you, Natalie.
Thank you, Achilles. We will indeed hear more about the Mu.SA project and how the project has addressed the digital challenges that Achilles has been referring to and its successful outcomes in the second section of the program. But before that, I want to give the floor now to Tere Badia, and I want to share with you this image that you might have come across in the social media these days. COVID-19 crisis has indeed very much accelerated our digital transition, but are we aware of the environmental impacts of our digital presence? Tere Badia will take us through this seldom discussed question. Tere, the floor is yours. Tere?
You should unmute.
Yeah, okay. Now?
Yes.
Now you can hear me? So, okay.
Thanks.
I'll start. So good morning to everyone. And so thank you. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for being at the other side of this screen today. So 2 days ago, a Spanish newspaper published an article on the museums, on the new reality of the museums. And the title was "The Museum of the Future Says Goodbye to Mass Exhibitions." So this health crisis will transform the life of art institutions. And we will have to learn how to live with drastic change that includes massive drop of visitors, among other challenges. And the relevance of a Mu.SA project today is now more evident than ever. I am very happy to have the opportunity to co-host this final conference here. As in other aspects of social and economical life, I think we must rethink everything right now, as we might be in a change of paradigm. Well, I hope we are in a change of paradigm. So there is no point in following the same museum practices in exhibitions, public programs, and education, no matter which size or centrality the museum has. We should also rethink not only the mechanism, how we work, and but the goals also, including the museum's contribution to the social needs and to the general needs of society. As pointed out by Achilles Kameas, the research done by Mu.SA aimed at identifying the digital and transferable competences for supporting museum professionals to thrive in a digital environment. Although Mu.SA research focused on emerging job profiles in the museum sector connected to the new technologies, the underpinning theme is the need for a mental shift and a cultural change in terms of the planning and visioning of museums, services, and role. And the key role of digital technologies, well, it's clear now. It's now more present than ever when millions of citizens are at home using the internet and IT devices for different purposes: work, communication, education, entertainment. Okay, but beyond this massive use of digital technologies, there is also a fundamental need of community life, and culture is a fundamental component of this being together. taking care of this digital place where we meet involves also designing mechanisms able to strengthen cultural communities' capacity and resilience to be able to act in the digital sphere in suitable conditions. Now, why we need more projects like Mu.SA? Despite the crucial role of digital technologies today, we should take in the next future in account at least two big challenges regarding the internet and the digital technologies in the cultural sector and in museums in particular. First, we should be aware of the sustainability of these technologies. On one hand, sustainability is the opposite of massive consumption, including the consumption of cultural goods. So we should approach content digitization and distribution under this perspective. On the other side, sustainability affects also the environment impact of digital infrastructure, which is huge. And as a footnote, according to recent research report from the Swedish KTH in 2019, around 10% of the world's total electricity consumption is being used by the internet. The numbers have grown from 8% in 2012, illustrating the increasing effects of this internet rapid growth. That means internet is also as a whole currently accounts today for 2% of global emissions, CO2 emission, and that's the same as all global aviation. With this fast progression, there is an urgent need to raise awareness about how hard infrastructures, servers, data centers, cables, raw materials, etc., and the soft infrastructure, algorithms, and interface operates. For this, we need more responsible use of the technologies, and we need to ensure cross-disciplinary research for a more sustainable technological development whilst harnessing the huge potential for adding value in our cultural projects and our society. A second crucial topic for the cultural sector is the fact that both contents and data are collected and selected by automatized bias algorithms that filters access to them and often hinders plurality, diversity, and transparency, which are fundamental values of democracy and human rights in its wider sense. So a deeper attention to the backstage of the software operational schemes is needed to ensure equal representation and access to culture. Culture research and education and training must be put at the front to cope with these challenges, and museums are at the central position for doing so. So we need a second museum project to go further and work on this. So museums are places that are above all public services and must serve everyone and must be accessible for everyone. But this can only be reached if we can involve in this adventure public policies, institutions, organizations, and the citizens and the public to ensure that the digital sphere is a safe, free, fair, and open platform for all. So thank you very much for hearing.
Thank you, Tere. For the ones who have just joined the conference, I want to remind you that you'll have the opportunity to ask the questions to both Achilles and Tere after our keynote speech. And to ask your question, please use Q&A section that you see on the bottom of your screen. Now I'm delighted to introduce Julia Pagel, Secretary General of the Network of European Museum Organizations, better known as NEMO. NEMO acts as a European umbrella for all national museum organizations and thus speaks for over 30,000 museums in Europe. The corona crisis has heavily affected the cultural and creative sectors, including museums. But the sector has been quick to come up with alternatives to ease access to culture in confinement. Museums have been at the forefront of proposing ways for digital participation in culture by offering, for example, online visits. What are opportunities to seize and challenges to tackle for the museums? What kind of policy solutions are necessary? I'm happy to give the floor to our guest speaker, Julia Pagel now. Julia?
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
We can hear you very well.
Great. I'm going to share my screen with you so you can see the presentation I made. Can you see it?
We see it.
Wonderful. So again, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the introduction, Natalie. It's good to be here with you digitally. It's actually my first keynote online that I'm delivering. So this is something new probably for most of us. As you were saying, I was invited to speak about how museums are coping in the present situation. The coronavirus is keeping most of us at home these days and changes our daily lives. Some call it a crisis, and that made me think of the title of this presentation, which is, which I cannot change now. Wait a second. Okay, how do I change the presentation? Well, apparently I cannot change the wait a second, I'm sorry. I'm trying to use the, can you see my screen now?
We cannot see it anymore.
You cannot see it anymore. It's not good. I'm very sorry. Should have tried this before.
Now it's back. Yes.
Okay. I still cannot change the. God, I cannot change the pictures. Anyways, so my idea was to use a quote, which is very well known. It's the quote, "Never waste a good crisis," and it's attributed to Winston Churchill, who has said this after World War II with regard to rebuilding the industry. But I discovered he was also a painter, and that will be my next slide, which I'm not going to show to you, apparently. He was a painter, and he painted a lot of pictures. One of his paintings was just sold at an auction house for 2 million euros. So my idea is that he was maybe also thinking about the arts when he was saying this very favorite and famous quote of his. And why I have chosen the quote is that, again, we're in very challenging times, and that's typically a very good moment to question accepted reality, find new paths, which may well be outside the usual compass. A lot of questions are being debated right now, as you were all saying already in your introductions, about what kind of work is really important and whether it's paid accordingly. And we talk about system relevant work. A lot of stuff, on the other hand, doesn't seem so important anymore all of a sudden. But what we have seen is that culture has been very prominent in the past weeks on the internet. And in uncertain times, it seems to bring us together, and it's something that what we can all identify with. So I would even say that we are currently witnessing an unprecedented creative digital use and engagement with and through culture in the world. And on the other hand, and you've also mentioned this already, the situation has had devastating economic and social consequences on the culture sector, whether employed or freelance workers in the cultural sector, but also the organizations, all of them are facing a dramatic loss of income, not only a loss of income. So we were thinking about what would be a good response for the sector to this situation. And with NEMO, which is the European umbrella organizations for museums, we felt it was necessary to document and analyze the impact of the coronavirus situation on museums in Europe. As you might know, one of the main objectives and also activities of NEMO is to indeed the advocacy work for museums. So getting an overview of how museums in Europe are doing was an essential part of the exercise. I would like to share some of the insights of the survey with you, since it doesn't only give a good picture about the economic impact or losses that museums have had and will have to deal with, but also some finding which points us to opportunities for museums to reach out to new audiences, increase their visibility via digital means, despite the fact that they are closed. So now I'm trying to go back to the survey, which I cannot change here. I'm sorry for that. I don't really know how to operate. I cannot change the pictures while I'm sharing my screen. So I will have to go forth and back, unfortunately. Short intro to the survey. 650 museums participated until 3rd April. From 41 countries in total, including all 27 EU member states. The survey is still open, and that gives us the opportunity to compare how the situation has developed first 2 weeks, second 2 weeks, and we'll also have another overview, hopefully by May, June. Overview in a nutshell, and that doesn't come as a surprise to you. Most of the museums are closed, 92%. For many of them, a date for reopening is not yet defined. Closing doors to the public also means a loss of income for many museums. So while some museums have found their budget minimally impacted, some museums, and especially the larger ones, and the museums in touristic areas have reported an income loss of 75 to 80%, with weekly losses adding up to hundreds of thousands of euros. And some of the core activities of museums, like lending and borrowing, are affected. Most international exhibitions from museums in Europe all over until the end of 2020 are postponed, since international transport and loans cannot be planned for the next months, even if museums open again. And on top of that, many museums have reported that long-term infrastructure projects have been placed on hold, and they will be reconsidered due to possible crisis-related budget rearrangements. So that's quite a situation that museums have to deal with. So what we wanted to know is how museums react to this situation. And, sorry for this, but it takes a bit longer, but it actually works. So the good news is that the majority of museums have not had to lay off staff yet. So around 70% of the museums report that they have had to change staff assignments to accommodate the current needs. But as you can see here, a substantial number of museums have put their contracts with freelancers on hold, and most of the museums have stopped their volunteer programs entirely. And considering the fact that freelancers are way more common nowadays, this actually makes a very large number of museum staff that's currently not working. But I would like, other than the economic impact, I would really like to show you a bit more in detail how museums have used their digital resources in the past weeks, sharing collections, offering digital tools, and what was the consequence of this. So I'm going to switch to another slide. Yep. Which is that 60% of the museums have increased their online presence in the last 2 weeks, or 3 weeks already. A creative solution to cater for new and these additional online services has been to shift staff tasks to provide online services. That means that staff that originally does different stuff is now doing online activities. 30% of the museums have done that, while 13% have even added resources to online activities. So if you look at this, what museums are offering, when you look at what museums are offering, you say that you see that half of the museums stay with their normal offers, but 37% have actually increased activities. 23 have even started new online activities. And these increased online services mean mostly an increased use of social media channels, but museums have also increased features of their collections online. They have added new digital objects to the online repository, and they have developed new online exhibitions and tours. Not surprisingly, museums who have reallocated staff tasks are the ones most active in starting new online services, mostly virtual tours and online exhibitions. And I would like to show you now what that meant for the visitors. So if you look at this, you see that 40% of the museums reported an increased web traffic by 10 to 20%, but another 40% reported an increase by 40 to 60% per week, most prominently in Austria, Romania, and Spain. Some of the museums have even seen the online visits increase by over 100%. So now if we do the math, and I'm sorry to bombard you with so many numbers, I'm not very good at them either. If you consider, and this is a Eurobarometer statistic, if you consider that 82% of Europeans are online daily, 75% in social media, yet only 42% of Europeans visited a museum at least once a year, the current situation brings museums a very great opportunity to making new friends digitally. And we see that many museums have understood this and take the opportunity. But I think this is the margin, and this is the potential that we can tap. And this is also the moment where I would like to show you some examples of museums that really did a great job adding those digital offers. I think now with this problem with my PowerPoint presentation, I'm not gonna slide through the next 10 slides in 1 minute. So I'm just gonna give you an idea of what I was trying to say. The Castello di Rivoli in Turin, for example, this museum had just had to close just after launching 3 new exhibitions. And it has now released digital tours and videos for each of the shows, featuring an introduction to the topic, to the artworks, and interviews with the artists. This website is really delightful. It's fun to be there and spend your whole day there. Same goes for the Museo Nacional Thyssen-Bornemisza in Spain. They had just opened a Rembrandt exhibition. They've created a virtual tour through the exhibition, including curators' talks twice a day. We have great examples from Austria, where they find digital learning features, like an interactive way you can slip in the role of a superhero or a queen, create a monster, specific stories available for kids. They really have a great repository to engage with for the whole family. The Belvedere Museum, we have the Moderna Museet Museum in Sweden that offers guided tours at lunchtime, which are live. And they are called sofa tours. They take place at 12 noon. You can watch them through the Instagram and Facebook pages. And it's actually really a pity you can't see this, but you've probably all heard from the wonderful initiative called Between Art and Quarantine. It's going under the hashtag Tussen Kunst en Quarantine, which is Dutch, I guess. So the idea is to reenact a work from collections of different museums. People share their photos under the same hashtag, and the museums that are involved are, for instance, the Getty in Los Angeles, the Louvre, Landesmuseum Hannover, and all of them will exhibit these best reenactment pictures after their reopening. And we also have museums that do like a museum for everyday culture. So they collect culture, they collect Corona, and they document for future generations how Europeans felt when dealing with Corona through photos and impressions and thoughts. They've put out a request to everybody in Europe to send in whatever they feel they connect with Corona. The list of examples is endless. I know that we'll talk about this in the conference later on, so I'm gonna stop here. Also, it's less fun if you don't see the slides. But all these examples and also the survey is available on our website, so you can have a look at this later. But what maybe is the quintessence of it is that all of this should be acknowledged and supported, both from the museums themselves to put digital activities finally at the core across departments and structures, but also for policymakers and funding organizations. I think it shows that the digital museums and digital services are not distant promises or sources of untapped potential. We actually believe that digital cultural heritage and engagement has demonstrated its value in the past weeks by bringing people together and encouraging creativity and sharing experiences and offering a virtual space to build ideas together. So I think what we should do collectively is to ask stakeholders to increase their digital efforts, and that means budget and strategies should acknowledge the importance of digital engagement and take advantage of the current efforts and allow for investments in digital offers and skills and infrastructures. As you were saying already, Mu.SA is a very good start to look at the skills side. I think from the infrastructure perspective, there's still a lot of room for improvement. But in general, we can say urging governments to invest in the future of Europe's parenthesis digital cultural heritage is something that we all need to do in the past time. And I think this is the arguments that we get out of this crisis, if you want to say so, are really convincing, finally. And I would like to end with another quote, which I overheard the deputy director of the Victoria and Albert Museum say, which I really liked. And he said, museums might not change the world, but museums at their best can show what humanity can do at its best. And that is what we need for our future ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia, for this compelling presentation. And indeed, it's a pity that we didn't.
Sorry for that.
It's pity, but well, we are all adjusting to the new realities and to trying to keep up with our digital skills. Now we will be opening the floor for questions from the audience. Again, to ask your question, please use the Q&A section. You can direct your questions to all the speakers, to Julia, but also to our previous contributors, Tere and Achilles. I see that we already have a number of questions that have been posted in the section. I will take the first one from that comes from Mimika Kripka, and the question is for you, Julia. And Mimika asks, when you say online activity of the museums, what do you mean for this unusual situation? Online guided tours, seminars, games, or pictures? So I guess the question is, what kind of, through this survey where you have been also trying to identify the good practices, what are the good practices or the most interesting practices that you have come across when museums try to operate digitally?
Maybe I can share my screen to this one stat again. So when we were asking the museums about what kind of online services they would provide, we were asking about, it's very small, so I'm going to read it. Online learning programs, exhibitions, obviously, virtual tours through the museum, which is different than an online exhibition, podcasts, YouTube programs, newsletter, live content, then the museum collection online, working with hashtags on social media and featuring objects to the online audience. So this is something that happens on your website, and it's both adding to whatever you have on your website already, for example, your online collection, but it's also using social media, any kind of other platform like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, to disseminate what your museum has to show. Does it make sense? And maybe to give you a hint of the outcomes of this survey is that the social media bits, so whenever Instagram, Facebook, YouTube were used, these are the ones that increased most in digital visitors.
As many of the participants are asking for more information that you probably have in your slides, I propose that we can share
Yes.
your presentation later on with all the attendees in the email that we'll send after the webinar, so you can have a look in detail on all the information that Julia has prepared. Another question comes from Sara Sottini from Coop Culture, which is an Italian cooperative company managing accessibility of cultural sites on behalf of the Ministry of Culture. Sara says that in Italy, public help for museums is very limited. And she asks, what will happen if all cultural contents become free and open? Then how will the private companies survive? I think this is a very acute question. Julia, maybe you have some ideas on that.
To be honest, I don't think it's about the content. It's about what kind of services you create around the content. So we have all learned in the past years that if you just put out your content for free online, nobody's going to look at it. It's the added value that you create for the person on the other side of the computer to use this stuff. So a private company, if they organize a great service around a digital content that is available for free, will probably even, I guess, increase their income, because they can use everything for free, but the service they create around it must be great. And this is the only question. It's not about having the access to the actual digital collection. It's about what you create around it. And I think Europeana is a very good example of whether there are good services or not so good services. You can see that some of the collections, the collection itself is not used very much, but if you create something great around it, for example, an exploratory tour in the city, then people are really inclined to use the stuff.
So it's not about the content as much as it is about the services that you and environment that you create around that. We have another question that comes from an anonymous attendee of the webinar, and that might be any of you can take that, because it's a little bit philosophical, if you like, but also very practical. And this person is asking that after all this experience that we're going through and living through this pandemic, would that be possible to move our life and our work virtually for good after we're back to normal? Would anybody like to share your opinion about, or your vision about how we will go back to normal, if we will ever go back to normal, and what would be the lessons or practices that we have learned in this period of confinement that we will take across in the future? Tere, well, you would like to take that, or Achilles, or Julia, if you have it, please go ahead.
I mean, certainly I don't have an answer to it, but I think what I actually wanted to say with the presentation is that a crisis or a situation like this opens up your vision to how can we do it differently, because we're critically looking at what went wrong. So this is a good opportunity to do things differently. And I think, I mean, apart from the fact that all of us have probably understood that we don't need to travel around the world to be at one meeting, but we can very well do it online. I think one of the things, and Tere was mentioning it already with the newsletter article that she was mentioning about the future museum and saying goodbye to mass exhibitions. I think very practically what that could mean is that you look at new assessment frameworks, what makes a museum successful, for example, because a museum normally, if you look at it, it would be visitor numbers. So after this crisis, and knowing that a situation like this, a virus like this, can always come back, and will probably come back, we might want to rethink whether we want millions of people in one museum, or if we need a new assessment and a new framework, also for the funding organizations who base their funding on the success of a museum, whether we want to go more into the digital stuff, or if we want to go more into quality, what have people learned from it? How have they made connections with it? I think this is something that we should have done a long time ago, but maybe now it's more urgent, and we can use this rethinking of a lot of different stuff to push for new assessment frameworks, also for cultural organizations in general.
Thank you, Julia. Anybody else want to react on that? If not, we can continue.
Well, I could say a couple of words also. Thank you. The question was about whether we're going to return to normal, but actually here, I think the question here is what is going to be the new normal? This pandemic was caused a big disruption in our society, in our system, and now the society will have to reach a new equilibrium. Whether this is going to be more digital, more lonely, I mean, more distance, or not, this is something we'll have to see. For sure, this is an opportunity for us individuals and for us as a society, as member of a society and society as a whole, to improve our ways, improve our procedures, and test new technologies and new services, and discover or develop new capabilities that will help us. I mean, how many of us used the time at home to do things that we didn't do before, didn't find the time? How many of us learned to use new online applications that we weren't using before? How many of us developed new competencies in order to use these applications? How many of us remember the old friends or people that we used to know and we never talked about, but now with this opportunity, we thought of them, we spoke with them to see if they are okay, and so on. I see many activities taking place online among people, social activities, and this is good. This is something I like. But what I like most is that services provided by the state or by organizations are becoming more effective because they are transferred online. So we are all learning. This is a steep learning curve for us for the moment. I think we will emerge better as better people and better societies after that. Let's be optimistic.
Thank you, Achilles. Optimism will keep us going for good, hopefully. We have many questions that are pouring into our Q&A section. We'll try our best to take as much as we can, but we have also time constraints. So let's go for the next one from Benedetta Manoeli. This question also goes to Julia. And Benedetta says that she works for a private company, DAISSy Servizi, which is working in the public libraries and the very little local museums in the surroundings of Florence. And her question is, how do you think, Julia, what is the reality of the small local museums who have very little audience, and how can they survive if they do not already have digital solutions in place? Maybe you have come across some data on that through your research, and indeed, what is the situation of the smaller scale museums that are working in a small environment and are working with the small audiences, and maybe very often do not have enough staff or resources, human or financial, to transition towards digital?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. We had a lot of feedback from small museums, interestingly, to the survey, also from a lot of museums that are located in rural areas, so that have community dispersed of the place. I think they are in a position where they have advantages and disadvantages at the same time, because small museums typically work with the communities that are very close to them. There are not museums where a lot of tourists come by. So they're losing their immediate community around them. But I think normally that's the case. The communities are more attached to the museum as well. It's a small community, but it's a community, at least if the museum does a good job, they're attached to it. So my suggestion would be that a lot of stuff that you're doing analog, in an analog way, physically, you can actually transfer to a digital sphere. Going to people and asking them for objects can become a digital request to people to send in their ideas, a picture, a thought, something that they saw on the street, and do something online. I think you can also create an agora in a virtual space. Obviously, it's not the same, but maybe you can even open up to, say, new audiences and younger audiences. And if you don't have the technical measures for it, because you might not have the money for it, why don't you use Facebook, Google? I mean, this is all, we know that this is maybe a questionable practice, and this is all very big players that have a different agenda than we have. But in order to reach the people around you, I think it's a very, very good start, especially when you're a small museum without a lot of resources.
And probably continuing on this same line, Corinne Schneider from is saying hello, and then she comments and gives you a question, Julia. And she says, as the European Network for Valorization of Digital Contents and also aggregator for cultural institutions, and mainly museums, and she's referring to microculture, we can of course confirm how important the digital cultural heritage is and how the services are very important. Mm-hmm. But she asks the question, or the challenge is to how to deal with the gap between small museums and big museums in their capacity to provide digital cultural heritage or services. What about diversity of services that museums offer, diversity of language? She says that she agrees that we need to advocate for both budget for digitization for institutions and also to support of diversity of experimentation in terms of services. So in this line, maybe Julia, would you have any recommendations, policy recommendations in that direction? Where should public authorities, both at national or in that case also at the European level, should be contributing to, and what kind of actions you would propose for them to finance?
So many things. So many things need to be financed. I think one of the crucial bits on the digital level is, as much as on the analog and level, visitor research. You have to know your audiences in order to know what kind of services you want to provide and offer. And museums have started to do visitor research with the people coming to their museums. But I think they're not very good at looking at the digital visitors at the moment. What kind of profile do they have? What are they visiting? What's the best visited services that museums have come up with? Which is the best platform I'm using? Which platform should I use when I'm addressing young people, when I'm addressing old people? So I think this is a crucial first step that museums have to do. And before that comes defining who you want to cater to, because you can't cater for everybody. If you cater for everybody, you cater for no one. So I think this is one of the crucial bits that should be financed on EU and also on national and local level. And I think another bit, and I mentioned this before, is looking at quality criteria and assessment frameworks. Because a museum, what is a successful museum? I think we have to rethink a successful museum being stormed by 1 million people to look at a great exhibition. This is not what a successful museum will probably look like in the future. And looking at what kind of services are are successful? What kind of added value can you bring to society, especially when you stay home for a longer time? What kind of education services, for example, can you bring? What kind of creativity can you spark in people? What kind of sense of connectedness can you put out there? I know that this is hard to measure, and we've been advocating for this, and Culture Action Europe has been advocating for this for a long time. But I think it's necessary in order to get the full picture of what museums can deliver. We will never be an economic enterprise that can be only measured in numbers. So I think this is one of the crucial bits, really.
Indeed, measuring the impact of arts and culture is very crucial in all those discussions. We will take last two questions from the audience, and again, apologies for the ones that we are not able to answer. There are many questions coming in. Eftikia Parisopoulou is asking, do you think that the digitization of museums or the creation of temporary digital projects will help with the unemployment issue in the museum department? So if those practices that we're putting in place now will have long-term effects towards creating more employment in the museum sector?
Potentially, yes. I think it really depends on, in German we call that Projektitis, which is a word to denominate like a virus of projects. There are so many projects and another project and a project, instead of really looking at what a digital museum means when you look at core structures of museums. And coming across all departments, have a digital museum across all departments. So I don't see that a lot of new projects will create new jobs. What I do see is that if you put digitization at the core of what museums doing, there are new functions, there are new tasks, there are new job profiles. So this can potentially help, and it can also help people that are not museologists to work in a museum. And I think this is also core when you look at diversity issues. Who works in a museum, and does the museum inside reflect what's outside of the museum? So this can be a very important step, and I think we're still at the very start of realizing what a digitized museum means, as much as we've been through what does education in a museum mean. 20 years back, education was just one small department, and the educators had to, you had an exhibition and then you put it in front of the educators and you said, well, do something with it and sell it to the audiences. And nowadays, in many museums, fortunately, we have the educators being at the start of when an exhibition is created, because they need their view. They have understood that if you don't think about education from the very start to the very end, you will never have a museum that caters for the different audiences. And this is exactly the step that we still haven't done fully, I would say, with the digital aspect.
Indeed, these are some of the questions, or many of those questions are being also looked into as through the Mu.SA project, and we'll be hearing more about the project in a very short while. But before we go to the next session of this online conference, I will take the very last question that comes from Gaia Fagiolo, I'm sorry for all those pronunciations, who is a freelance conservator restorer from Italy. And he wanted to ask a question to Tere Badia, if Tere can give some of the good practical cases or models, good models of working in a sustainable manner in the cultural sector. So I guess she's referring to some good practices that you might want to share with the audience. Some projects, some maybe groups of artists that are working on the issue of arts and sustainability.
Yes, so thank you for the question. So yes, I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna try. So this is, oops, this is not the one. So this is my desktop. Okay, just 1 minute, share. And this is something I wanted to share with you, which is about of 1,000 tons of kilograms of CO2 right now emitted since 10:20 this morning, just opening this website. So yeah, this is for example a good project. So it's there's some artists, there's some technology software developers, hardware developers that are working in this issue. Yes, I completely agree with this, with what Julia was saying. It is not, of course, we can optimize the contents. That is the first thing that we should do. So we, of course, sometimes we will need high resolution images or high resolution sound, but not always. So that's something that we have to keep in mind, because every single byte that that we are uploading, it's also has an impact, a physical impact in our environment. But I really, that's something that I very like very much from what Julia said, that it's not about the contents, but about the added value of the contents, around the contents. And this is not going back to business as usual. I think we cannot go back to this business as usual. We cannot work as the same as we were working. We cannot live the same as we were living. We have to change, of course, the indicators of cultural sector, of a lot of sectors. Visitors are not, physical visitors are not going to be indicators. So travels are not going to be indicators for a good cooperation project. So we need to rethink also the consumption. So there's, of course, a lot of projects on circular economy and so on that are rethinking the idea of consumption, this high-speed mass consumption of goods and services. So I think we should rethink this, and you can find a lot of projects that are doing this. And I want to insist the value of the public. So we are using now internet, and internet is so a basic service that we should better the infrastructure in the sense of rethinking the impact of this infrastructure in all the levels. But we need to consider as well these technologies as a public good, so as a commons, a new commons. And I'm gonna share with you another website, which is a very interesting one. There's, oops, sorry. No, I can stop share. This is a website that tells us what the biggest companies, social networks, from Google, from YouTube, from Amazon, Twitter, GitHub, SoundCloud, all this software. It's a website that goes through the rights that we are giving to them, to all these companies, private companies, related to our services, our own data and our own content. So we think that when we upload some content, this is still our own content, but it's not. So this website for all of you, it's terms of service didn't read. It's www.tosdr.org. And there's as well this very good example of how to go deeper. I was the one that I was trying to say before, deeper in what is behind every software and what is behind every hardware, just to rethink the whole content. I'm sure that this is going to learn us that digitally it's crucial and it's very important. I think that's why projects like Mu.SA are crucial, but we have to really rethink how we manage and how we restructure consumption and of cultural goods and the infrastructures that are behind this. That's it.
Thank you, Tere. Thank you very much. Thanks to all the speakers. A big thank you to Julia for your participation. Tere, you can, of course, invite it to stay over at the conference, but now we are going to move to the next session of our event, which will be looking into presenting the outcomes of the Mu.SA project.